Us today, we have Mayuresh Joshi on the fundamentals, Prakash Gaba to answer all of your technical queries. Mayuresh as well as Prakash, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining in. Let's get going in terms of the first caller that we have. We have Meenakshi Vashisht, who calls us from New Delhi with a question. She has investments in Cipla. Hi Meenakshi, you've got around 100 shares?
Hello ma'am. Yes, I'm holding Cipla 100 shares at 545 for the past 2 years. So can I know its long-term view, please?
Okay, for the past 2 years, and you want to know the long-term view. You are okay with holding on to it for how long more?
Past 2 years. I mean, the long-term view, I just want to know.
Okay, all right. Mayuresh, what would you expect? Because Meenakshi is just about flat on her performance with regards to Cipla now. She's a long-term investor, so she's okay with holding Cipla for a longer period of time. She's held it for 2 years and she's just about 500 rupees higher in terms of her investment. So what would you recommend? Do you think that there's upside? Do you think that it could probably be a multi-bagger? It could probably change its fortunes, at least in terms of her investment in the next 2 years, 3 years?
Afternoon, Ekta. I think the stock has probably seen the worst in terms of the financial performance. And my own take is that the earnings recovery should be very, very steady going forward for the stock. Now, the key attributes for the result gone by, there were a lot of one-offs. You did see discounting probably come into effect, destocking as far as their B2B inventory is concerned. And there were some manufacturing constraint which knocked off an element of profits from the bottom line. Having said that, again, I think the strong ANDA pipeline that they probably possess at this point of time, around 260, 270 ANDAs approved for the US market, huge amount of DMF filings for the other geographies as well, including Europe and Africa, and a large element in terms of the US business turning a bit positive. The South African business, specifically I think the private business in South Africa, actually auguring very, very well for the company going forward, and expectations of the tendering business as well, because they've got 30 products in the entire tendering business, which obviously had seen a huge amount of slowdown. From a geographical perspective, India accounts 40%, and the chronic segment here is going to be extremely critical. Again, I think the kind of expectations from the acquisitions in Vijay and XLN, again a strong pipeline there as well. So I think the addressable market size is pretty huge, about $7 to $8 billion, which can be addressed with the kind of ANDAs that they have from both these acquisitions. So I'm expecting a steady growth to come through on the top line, a steady growth in terms of the operating performance, with margins stabilizing between 20-21%. And again, from a valuation perspective, doesn't look too expensive at this point of time. So I think it's a clear hold from my side with a clear disclaimer. We own this stock in our funds. Okay, clear hold is the advice that's coming in there from Mayuresh. And then I think we have another query that's coming in there. We have a caller who's calling us from Kerala, and I think the investments you're talking about is CDSL. Hi ma'am, good afternoon. If we could know your name first, and if you could also tell us what's your...
Good afternoon, I am Bhagilakshmi.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I am Bhagilakshmi. I am holding 50 shares of CDSL for the last 2 years. I can hold it longer. I want to know the performance.
Okay, you can hold it longer is what you're saying. Let's go across to Mayuresh first. Mayuresh, long-term investor on CDSL, unfortunately sitting on a bit of a loss. Your advice? Afternoon, Nigel. Look, I think the stock has gone through a very painful time, and you're absolutely right in that. And what has actually happened over the past few months with the Aadhaar authentication actually going off, the eKYC revenues have probably come off. Their annuity business probably still holds very, very strong. But the other elements of their business, for example, the IPO business obviously depends in terms of how the primary offerings are expected to come. But again, I think if you look at the holistic part of the business, I think it's a very asset-light model. The fixed costs are very, very minimal. They've got ample cash on their balance sheet, which probably covers a lot of their market cap at this point of time. And the third element obviously is the kind of revenue streams that they've got, which probably de-risk is the entire element if one element probably just goes a little bit sour. Now the other element that is probably happening in terms of the QR code scanning when it probably comes to the KYC platform, I think that might start gaining accretion from a top line perspective. The National Academic Depository Scheme, I think a lot of universities are probably signing up, and the untapped opportunity, Nigel, that can probably come through is when these unlisted companies, I think they start coming into the dematerialized form as well. So there is a huge market rocket size for them at this point of time. Unfortunately, I think for conditions beyond their control, they've probably seen the top line probably drop. But yes, I think if Prakash probably agrees that technically there can be some level where she can average and then probably hold on, I think it does make sense for her to probably do that over a longer period of time.
To another query now, we have Neha who writes to us from Mumbai, and she holds 230 shares of IDFC at 110 rupees since past 2 years, long-term investor, and wants to know whether to hold or sell. Mayuresh, what would you recommend? Because IDFC obviously has gone through a lot of changes in the past 2 years in terms of M&A and all of that. But net sitting on a loss at this point in time, what would you recommend to Neha?
No, sir, absolutely right. I think one really needs to adjust the kind of corporate actions and changes that have gone through for the stock as a whole. But again, I think my premise will be pretty clear. I think she'll have to have a lot of patience if she intends to carry on with the stock. Our own take is, again, I think on a similar basis. I think if you're looking at this space, I think the private corporate financials is something that we feel should do really well over the next couple of years. And again, I think the return ratios for all these private corporate financiers have actually gone in the dumps. So as the improvement probably starts translating into numbers and the balance sheet dynamics, the return ratios will itself start emanating the kind of accretion that one can expect on a book value or an adjusted book value, as the case may be. So I think private corporate lenders, the private financial banks, is something that I'll be very, very optimistic about.
Okay, and then we have Samya Bhatt, who writes to us from Bihar. She holds around 140 shares of Dwarikesh Sugar at around 60 rupees for the last 13 months. Long-term investor, though, wants to know whether or not to hold or to sell. Money has halved, unfortunately, from the buy price. Mayuresh, your take on the sugar theme, and is Dwarikesh a stock that our investors should be hanging in?
So I think the sentiments are turning very, very positive for the sector as a whole. The increase in prices, what you've probably seen in terms of the ethanol pricing as well, both the B level and the C level molasses pricing, is obviously going to abet sugar companies' earnings. So I think the profit before tax is definitely going to improve. And companies which are probably integrated at this point of time with Gochen, with distillery operations and the ethanol capacities as well, are clearly going to be key beneficiaries in the next sugar cycle. Having said that, again, I think Dwarikesh, from a long-term perspective, again, I think the long-term debt is nil. You've probably seen reasonable amount of sales numbers come through. And again, I think in terms of how the positioning of the stock is within the entire sector, I'll obviously continue with stocks like Balrampur or Adhampur at this point of time. But as the cycle is turning favorable, I think it's very well that the investor can hold on. A disclaimer, I think the stock that we probably own in our funds is DCM Shriram within this entire space.
Okay. All right, Prakash as well as Mayuresh, we're going to thank you all on that note. Thank you very much for joining in, taking us through all of those queries. It's all the time that we have on the show. But do remember to email us all of your questions and we will address them with our experts. Stay tuned. Closing Bell will take you through the last hour of